The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Earlier this week, we talked about how it's fundamentally flawed to demand that atheists prove that God does not exist. And we talked about this flawed notion that atheism is a sort of religion or some kind of dogmatic set of beliefs. And I said, it's kind of like arguing that not collecting basketball cards is a type of hobby. Well, former Republican senator as well as presidential candidate Rick Santorum has now jumped into the fray with basically the exact same type of nonsense. He was on the Brian Fisher Focal Point American Family Association radio program, and during the discussion, Santorum said that secularism is a religion, and not only that, it's a religion that should be banned in schools. Let's take a look at this audio and video clip from Brian Fisher's program, Rick Santorum. Here it is.
The idea that if you take religion out of the public square, if you take the Bible out of the classroom, that's neutral. Well, no, it's not neutral. It's a different worldview. You can call it, I think we should start calling secularism a religion, because if we did, then we could ban that too, because that's what they've done. They've hidden behind the fact that the absence of religion is not a religion of itself, which in fact it is.
Secularism is a principle that involves, I guess we could say, two different propositions. The first is there is separation of church and state, right? Secularism actually is not anything with regard to belief or lack of belief in God. Secularism says, as a government, as a country, we separate people's religion from government. And the second principle would be that all religions, beliefs, or lack thereof are equal before the law. And Rick Santorum is right in a way, which is that Christianity should be treated like any other religion. That's called secularism. That's not what we have, Lewis, when we look at, well, one religion happens to have federal holidays and no other religions do, for example.
This clip makes it very clear. We already knew this, but it still makes it very clear that Rick Santorum is not a very smart man.
No.
By definition, secularism is just not a religion. And if you don't care about the definition of religion, that's fine. You don't have to care about the definition of words. Also, how does it make sense to say that if we're banning Christianity because it's a religion, we should also ban secularism because it's a religion? Well, what are you left with? You're left with secularism because there's no religion.
Yes, secularism by its very nature is what you have left when you remove this connection between church and state. It's the same thing as atheism is not a positive set of beliefs that something does not exist beyond a reasonable doubt. It is simply a lack of belief in something. And this ridiculous notion of the absence of religion is a religion in and of itself. Try applying that anywhere else in life and see if it makes sense. Not exercising is an exercise program, right? Or not going to school is the type of education. Now, I know with that you could say, well, you might be doing something instead of going to school. But no. I'm just saying not going to school is a form of education. Examples aside, Lewis, it's amazing that in modern 2014, we still have people like Santorum who think that his arbitrary belief in the supernatural should be a guidepost for public policy.
He's blind. That's all it is. He's blind and brainwashed, and who knows? Maybe he doesn't believe any of it and just likes the votes.
In her upcoming memoir, Forgetting to Be Afraid, Wendy Davis, a Democrat from Texas, state senator, talks very candidly about the circumstances leading to past abortions in her life. And the National Review Online, a right-wing publication, attacked her for speaking out about these experiences, saying that, first of all, her description of the abortions, one of which saved her life, were, quote, convenient, and also downplaying the serious health issues that can be associated with certain pregnancies, as well as essentially dismissing the medical realities as told by Wendy Davis. And this is just absolutely sickening to me. In a September 9th post, the National Review Online questions the legitimacy of Wendy Davis's personal medical history. They call it convenient. They question the accuracy of her claims related to the abortion, and they demand Wendy Davis provide proof that the medical circumstances surrounding her abortions were as she describes. Then, on the September 9th edition of MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show, Wendy Davis responded saying, my family would give anything for this not to be a true story. And the idea that it's being called convenient is just absolutely absurd. As I thought about this, Lewis, I realized this furthers the idea from the right that abortions are not abortions in a sense, right? They are either immoral murders, if you follow one strain of right-wing thought, or they are props that Democrats use even decades earlier, decades before their political lives, for future political gain. They're almost like an abortion is a seed you plant to then harvest the fruit later when you need it for your political career, or something that women do because they like it, right? That's the other one. Liberals like abortion. They want more abortions. There is no other legal medical procedure that I can think of that right-wingers would respond to anecdotes of by demanding proof from the person who underwent that medical procedure. It's disgusting what is going on with the right with this procedure.
It's unfortunate that these are the types of things we focus on in campaigns when electing our officials. I wish it were different, but this is the type of thing that could be a deal breaker for her.
And I've heard Wendy Davis's story about her medical history in more detail, Lewis, and I encourage the audience to check it out. I don't know how you could read it and say that the abortions were, that the entire story around her abortions is convenient. That seems absolutely cruel if you actually read it, Lewis. And it almost makes me think that right-wingers don't really care about the specifics of abortion. They just are using it as a prop and a crutch around which to raise money and demonize the left.
And it's a very powerful weapon, of course. Why wouldn't they? In reality, they're trying to win this war, and they'll do it by any means necessary.
We've talked a little bit about the new right-wing television channel, Newsmax TV. One of the hosts of Newsmax TV is former Arizona Congressman J.D. Hayworth, a Republican. J.D. Hayworth interviewed Ben Carson. Ben Carson is this Republican, African-American neurosurgeon who is completely out of his mind and has become a kind of, he's been championed by many on the right, number one, to prove how unracist they are, because here's an extremely conservative black guy that we can point to who, in the midst of touting all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories, says some things that we agree with. So he's become kind of a poster child for not racist Republicans. He was interviewed by J.D. Hayworth, and he says, if you really want to know where President Obama's thought process is on a number of political issues, there are two places you can look. Listen to what those two things are.
Dr. Carson, some people are going to hear your words and they're going to say, wait a minute, Dr. Carson is calling President Obama and Attorney General Holder communists. Are you doing that?
My answer would be the same. Read the book. I just gave it to you. Read that book, The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen. And read, Mein Kampf, and read the works of Vladimir Lenin. Read them yourself. I tell people, don't listen to what I'm saying. Read it yourself. I think it'll make a much bigger impression on you.
Right. Mein Kampf, reading Mein Kampf will tell you about President Obama and his worldview and his motivations. And reading the writings of Vladimir Lenin will also inform you as to where President Obama is in his mind. Ben Carson has also previously claimed that President Obama wants to turn America into Nazi Germany and a Gestapo-like state, and also has warned that because of President Obama, we are now living in a Gestapo age. I actually think, Lewis, that Ben Carson is one of these guys who is so uninformed and or wrapped up in the feverish anti-Obama hysteria that he might think that Hitler was a communist. I'm getting the sense in how he talks about Mein Kampf and communism that he thinks that Hitler was a communist rather than a totalitarian dictator.
Well, there were some socialist policies and things happening in Germany at that same time.
But that's the thing. The American right can't distinguish between elements of socialism, which exist at the micro and macro throughout history in any number of societies. Go back and look at the levelers of the 18th or 19th century, completely disconnected from genocidal tendencies. And they like to wrap it all together and say, listen, anyone who has any socially democratic or democratically socialist ideas is indistinguishable from a madman who wants to kill millions of Jews and did it.
Well, luckily, when you're slandering the president, you can say anything and much of the country will believe anything.
And let me add one other note. For all of those who are going to write in and say, David, Hitler was clearly an atheist, as if it matters whether an individual was an atheist or not when they committed crimes or did good things or bad things. Have you actually read Mein Kampf and counted the number of references to God? I would encourage you to do that before you write to me saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. I have a feeling, Louis, a lot of these people have not even opened the book Mein Kampf.
Could very well be. There is certainly a religious aspect to Hitler.
Very bizarre article. You know, we talked about something really good that the BBC did recently, which is decide that as a matter of policy, they're not going to have these 50-50 fake controversy debates around climate change. They are going to present it the way the science presents it, which is an overwhelming consensus that human activities on Earth are connected to broad climate change. That was a good thing. Here's a bad thing that they did. There was a speech from Frances O'Grady, the first female general secretary of the Trades Union Congress. It's essentially a labor organization. And Frances O'Grady was giving a speech on the problems right now in the working class, increased inequality, the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. And just minutes after she warned of a return to a Downton Abbey society, the BBC cuts away from Frances O'Grady's very important speech about an issue that affects millions and millions of people, and instead has to announce, breaking news, that there will be another royal baby, Louis. The Duchess of Cambridge is pregnant. And when I read about this, I could not help but be reminded of when MSNBC, Andrea Mitchell, was interviewing Congresswoman Jane Harman, very important interview, and then all of a sudden they have to cut away for this.
And said that in a short period of time he wants recommendations. But I think at this point we should seriously consider not continuing
Congresswoman Harman, let me interrupt you. Congresswoman, let me interrupt you just for a moment. We've got some breaking news out of Miami. Stand by, if you will. Right now in Miami, Justin Bieber has been arrested on a number of charges. The judge is reading the charges, including resisting arrest and driving under the influence. He's appearing now before the judge for his bond hearing. Let's watch.
Number Craig on behalf of the state.
All right. Mr. Perez and Mr. Craig? Craigo?
Yeah. I mean, Louis, it's essentially the same thing, right? And I would have liked to imagine that BBC would not do this. Maybe I'm missing some kind of cultural context about the importance of royal babies in the United Kingdom, but it strikes me as the same type of thing, interrupting substantive conversations, which, by the way, on American corporate media are not even that common. You finally get a substantive conversation and you cut to news of Justin Bieber being in court, the BBC going away from one of the fundamental issues of modern society right now, increased inequality, to let us know, Louis, that the Duchess of Cambridge is expecting.
Normally, I praise the BBC. They usually do great work. They do have important discussions. I like their news coverage. And there is one exception. There is always one exception. And if it has to do with the royal family or some stupid royal baby or the Queen and all of that nonsense, they're all about it. But you will never hear breaking news on BBC about Justin Bieber getting arrested.
No.
Yeah.
And although you might hear breaking news on MSNBC about a royal baby, although I guess not in this particular case. Maybe it happened during a commercial break, and they certainly can't come back from those early. We know the bills need to be paid. We have Patriot Mail for you today. I have one of the most cringeworthy introductions at a political rally, maybe that I have ever heard. I will play that for you, and economist Richard Wolff will also join me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is, of course, made possible in part by liberalbias.com, because the more you look for it, the more you find it. You can find liberal bias in the most unexpected places at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Amy Miner, and Amy Miner has the very special privilege of being member of the day on the same day that we have a new David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame inductee, Matthew Enos. As of yesterday, in the David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame, is now able to get a free David Pakman Show apparel item, t-shirt, hoodie, or zip-up. It's just amazing, Lewis. The Hall of Fame ranks are growing, and all the better that Amy Miner is member of the day on the same day as Hall of Fame inductee Matthew Enos. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to become a member and get on your way to joining the ranks of the Hall of Fame. It is Wednesday, and with no further delay, I will explain to you what Hatriot Mail is.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Usually I have some kind of little introduction to the episode of Hatriot Mail. I have no such introduction today because I do not understand what this Hatriot Mail is about. I open it up to the audience and to you, Lewis, to try to interpret what on earth is being discussed here. I just don't get it.
You guys are such communist dictators who just want to redistribute wealth through tax hikes on the wealthy and got God handouts through raising's minimum wage, free healthcare, and more government subsidies for people who make less money.
Lewis, what are God handouts, or is that just a hatriotic typo?
I don't know. I've never heard of God handouts. I've never received one, if they exist.
Yeah, no, I haven't either. If anybody knows what a God handout is, please let me know, because I would love to know about that. That is, Lewis, I think, if we had to show someone one of the better examples of Hatriot Mail, I think today's episode is on the list.
I always love the ones where we're called communists. Those are just great.
As I mentioned earlier this week, former Massachusetts Republican Senator Scott Brown is now running for senator in New Hampshire. Oftentimes, his state switching, or some would call it flip-flopping, comes up, but usually it's Democrats who bring it up, not Republicans. This is one of the most cringeworthy political rally clips that we've maybe ever played on the show. Chris Sununu is a member of the New Hampshire Executive Council, and he's the son of former Governor John Sununu, also a Republican. And he mentioned Scott Brown's state switching, and he did it in the way that just makes no sense. Scott Brown, watch him if you're watching the video of this, doesn't even flinch when he's called a phony by the person who's introducing him at a political rally. Scott Brown doesn't flinch. I had the goosebumps, Lewis, from watching this. It is so awkward. Let's take a look.
Someone came up and said, hey, I'd love to meet Scott. I kind of always thought, and this is what he said, I always thought Scott was kind of a phony from Massachusetts. Yes. And I said, you got to sit down. You got to sit down with him, because he sat down. They had their little conversation. He walked away. You know what he said? He goes, that guy he's not a phony from New Hampshire that just happened to live in Massachusetts for a little while. He's more New Hampshire than most people we have in New Hampshire.
It would be tough to receive a more bizarre introduction when you're about to give a speech in front of your supporters. And I have to say, Chris Sununu does not seem particularly bright to me. I'm not in the business of advising Republican candidates, but if I were Scott Brown, I would distance myself from this guy. I can't imagine a worse introduction.
It was terrible, absolutely terrible. But luckily, like you said, he was in front of supporters. So presumably these people supported him before that terrible introduction.
That introduction, though, was actually the model of clarity compared to Scott's Brown position on the Affordable Care Act. He wants to get rid of it, but he wants to get rid of it and somehow keep all of its provisions, but in a way that doesn't restrict freedom and liberty and also doesn't cost anything. But Obamacare is bad. I actually was much more easily able to understand that introduction than Scott's Brown position on Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of his ideas were pretty complicated and not practical at all. But good luck to him in New Hampshire. I hope he loses.
Fox News contributor Todd Starnes was on the Daystar program Joni recently. This is one of the uber religious TV shows. They bring on, sometimes it seems like they're picking women merely for their physical appearance and not for their ability to engage in meaningful conversation. I know that that's really rare in right-wing media, but I think that might be happening here. And I'm going to play a video for you that is just amazing. He gets teed up this question, Lewis, about man-dog marriage, which is like a favorite refrain now of the right when they talk about same-sex marriage. And could it lead to men marrying dogs? And Todd Starnes basically saying, it's anyone's guess what could happen if there's same-sex marriage, because anything will go, apparently including man-dog relationships. Let's take a look at the video. Let's listen to the audio.
At what point is the line drawn as far as what is discrimination? You know, is it discrimination if they wanted to make a cake for them and their dog and, you know, they're going to get married to their dog? You know, is that something that's going to hold up? At what point do we say, okay, you know, this is not okay?
Enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because you're blurring the lines. I mean, because now marriage isn't being clearly defined.
And when you think about it, though, when you do redefine marriage, that means anything goes. Because at what you're no longer allowed to say, well, you can't marry. Well, who are you to say you can't marry? Because we've already redefined it. So so now it really is anything goes.
I like how he says, when you think about it, anything goes. I really like that. They believe, apparently, that, quote, thinking is equivalent to imagining their own personal worst-case scenarios based on a non-existent slippery slope. That qualifies as thinking, Lewis, when it comes to man-dog marriages.
There's not much thinking happening here. We already have people marrying inanimate objects. We've talked about it. We talked about the woman in Florida who married a Ferris wheel.
Yeah, but we have to be clear that she didn't marry the Ferris wheel in a legal sense. I mean, I think she got a church to do the marriage. But it was not a civil marriage.
It was, I believe it was illegal. It was a legal marriage. I do.
Okay, I don't remember that. But yeah. let me say something else, because the marrying a train or a Ferris wheel, that let's separate from a second and focus on the marriage of animals. Animals can't consent, okay? The idea that all of a sudden contracts that are between humans, if you expand it to include humans of the same gender, by extension, it's obvious that you're going to be able to marry a horse or a gazelle. It's ridiculous because animals cannot consent. It's like saying, listen, if you can own a house with another man, if you're a man, there is nothing stopping you from legally owning a house with your 3 gerbils. Because gerbils cannot be parties to contracts, right? Every time I hear this stupid slippery slope, I want to beat myself over the head with a hammer, Lewis, because anybody who says that doesn't understand anything.
But it's gone completely viral. And that seems to be the #1 argument from, I would say, about 40 to 60% of those who are against equal rights.
I'm actually having another thought, which is if you look at the states where it's not illegal to have sex with animals, they tend to be red states. And it's actually, those states are more numerous than the ones where same-sex marriage is legal. If the red staters are this desperate to marry their dogs or their horses or their cows or whatever, stop pretending like it's going to be an unwelcome side effect of same-sex marriage. Just come out and tell us, my state already has legal, or it's not illegal in my state to have sex with animals, and I'd like to marry my horse or my sheep. Just be upfront. Don't hide under, oh, it's a side effect of same-sex marriage. I would respect them, Lewis, if they were just more upfront with us.
Well, being upfront is not part of this game, is it?
No, I guess not. Richard Wolff joins us next. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're joined today by economist Richard Wolff. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts. And the topic today, I guess broadly speaking, is European economies. You know, Professor Wolff, I was in Europe a few weeks ago, as I told you about. And of course, every time I visit, I am struck by the contrast in terms of the attitude towards work that exists in Europe, a vacation time and the importance of time off taken so much more seriously than it is in the US and understood as important. But also I was interested in some of the European economies, particularly that of Switzerland, where the sticker shock upon arriving, stepping off the plane and seeing that any cheeseburger is $30 US was amazing. But in researching more about the economy in Switzerland, as a place that has retained its own currency, the Swiss franc, is not part of the EU, but does have numerous treaties with the EU. I'm interested in thinking of, we hear colloquially that Switzerland is doing very well. In what way do we see that reflected, and how can we judge whether an economy is doing well or not?
Well, the standard way that we judge, which isn't, by the way, very good, but the standard way is by looking at things like the GDP, the total output of goods and services as they are conventionally measured by both governmental and international agencies. Sometimes the total output divided by the number of citizens, GDP per capita. What is it? How does it compare to other countries? Has it been growing or has it been stagnating in recent years? Those are usually the ways in which we get a broad, quick sense of how an economy is doing. The problem with that is it can give you a very bad misimpression. Let me give you an example. If the incomes of the top 10% of a country, like Switzerland or any country, if the incomes of the top 10% are soaring, but the incomes of everybody else are stagnating, the average will show an increase. It's the old joke in economics. If you have 10 people, one of whom is a multimillionaire with $10 million, and the other 9 have nothing at all, the average wealth of this community of 10 is $1 million a person. I mean, that's true. That is the average, but it surely does not give you an accurate sense of what's going on. Switzerland, like other countries, but it's particularly clear in Switzerland, is a society in which the folks at the top, and that means mostly the folks who have to do with Switzerland's most important industry, which is finance, banking, and everything having to do with finance, those people have been doing very, very well, but they have gotten further and further distant from the average Swiss citizen, so that Switzerland, like many other European countries, is in fact caught in a growing inequality that is probably much more, gives you a much clearer understanding of what's going on there than looking at GDP numbers.
So let's contextualize that a little bit, because in my research, it turns out that many waiters, waitresses, people working in kitchens and restaurants in Switzerland often making 20, 25, or even more US dollars equivalent per hour. And we often hear in the US from the American right that, hey, if you raise minimum wages, everything gets very, very expensive. And sometimes they will point to Switzerland. They would say, look at what's going on in Switzerland. Great economy. Switzerland's doing so well, but cheeseburgers all cost $30, and they connect it to the high wages that even those presumably at the bottom of the earning brackets earn. Is that a fair assessment, or is that ignoring some important facts?
Well, I think there's an economic misunderstanding that comes from the American right wing. I'm being polite, and I'm using the word misunderstanding. What I really think is it's ideological pleading, and it's bad economics. Whether or not the price of a product is raised does not depend on the wages you pay your worker. It might be nice for a businessman or woman to be able to think that if the wages they have to pay workers go up, they can simply recoup that money by jacking up the price. But that never is true. And the reason for that is very simple. Many, many factors go into determining at what price you can profitably sell what you produce. You may want to raise the price for any one of a dozen reasons, but that wanting is a long way from being able to do it. Often a business will face a higher price for workers' wages, or for the price of electricity, or for the costs of their material inputs, or for the rentals they pay for their space. But that fee, that extra cost they have to pay, is something without which they can't continue to function. It's a completely different matter. Can they raise the price? It may well be that there's not enough market out there for them to be able to do that. And therefore, this notion that if you have a higher cost of wages, then you will have a higher prices simply isn't true. It makes no sense economically, and there's no historical record to show that.
Could it work in reverse in this sense, in that all business owners would love to raise prices, and it just so happens that in Switzerland, the market is able to bear that increase because even waitresses and cooks are making $20 to $30 an hour?
I'd adjust the answer. Short answer is yes, but let me adjust it slightly. The reason it's more often true in reverse is equally easy to understand in economics. If you have a general increase in prices, because companies across the board, well, not everyone, but most of them, think that they can sell as much or more than they did in the past while raising their prices, well, then we know what you learn in business school is if you can get away with raising your prices without losing customers, well, then you do it. If a lot of businesses do it, and therefore we have an inflation, that is a general rise in prices, one of the first things you can be quite sure will happen is that workers, having to pay now these higher prices, will be putting more pressure on their employers to raise their wages. But again, the economics tells us whether or not workers who want to have higher wages so they can pay the higher prices will be able actually to get the higher wages. That depends on all the factors that shape the relations between employers and employees. But there's no automatic mechanism that translates the one into the other. Employers like to claim, oh, I raised the price not because I want to make more profit from my customers. That wouldn't be considered good PR. So they prefer to say, I raised my prices because I had to, because my workers, damn them, forced me to. This is a little bit of a game, and people shouldn't be taken in.
Very quickly, in the last bit of time we have left, we also saw in Switzerland, they passed a vote, essentially a quota system on immigration, which some would argue conflicts with the goals and their treaty with the European Union, which is of free movement of labor as well as residents. We also saw the proposal, which did not yet, I don't remember if it didn't yet pass or if it failed, regarding the basic income in Switzerland. There's this very interesting kind of confluence in Switzerland of seemingly very progressive ideas that are being proposed, but also ideas that are more akin to some right-wingers in the U.S. wanting to limit immigration, for example. How can we characterize in general the direction that Switzerland is going?
Well, I think both the progressive and the more and less progressive dimensions you talk about have the root in the same place. Switzerland, like so many other countries, is becoming divided between the mass of people whose economic situation is, if at best, stagnant and in significant ways deteriorating, whereas a small minority are becoming very, very wealthy. And the reaction is that the Swiss have taken extraordinary steps to try to stop that. One of these proposals being that there be a guaranteed minimum wage, that every Swiss citizen be guaranteed as a matter of citizenship a minimum, and it was interesting, of over $30,000 a year as something you would get whether you worked or not, no matter what your job was, and so on. It was put to a referendum because I believe over 100,000 Swiss citizens signed petitions to do that. It did not succeed, but it came quite close, which means that not much less than half the people of Switzerland want that. And that doesn't exist anywhere else in Europe. That's a remarkable sign of what's happening. On the other hand, every country in Europe, because they have relatively high unemployment, because of the crisis that has hurt so many countries, the Europeans are split between countries that have done real well, like Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia, and countries that have not, like Greece or Italy or Spain. And not surprisingly, in a unified Europe, people from the poorer parts are trying to move for a better life to the parts that have done better. And this means a readjustment. The workers and the companies in the countries that have done better are not eager to share what they have done with those who haven't, even though they're all tied together. And so you see a kind of tension, and the Swiss have taken a step that is being considered in other European countries to limit that process. It does not augur well for the kind of unity that Europe has been trying, including Switzerland, to achieve.
No question about that. We're going to continue following Europe, the European Union, and the European economies, as well as Switzerland. We've been speaking with Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts, Richard Wolff. Pleasure as always having you on.
Glad to talk with you, David, anytime.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Several emails coming in over the last few days, people saying, David, do you have an iPhone? Will you be buying the iPhone 6? Talk about the iPhone 6. What do you think about it? I've said before on the program that I have a Samsung phone, the Galaxy S4 currently. I'm a big fan of Samsung phones, and I have to tell you, in reviewing this new iPhone 6, I know we have a lot of Apple fans that are in our audience, as well as a lot of Android fans. So I know I'm only going to anger some people with this, but I'm just going to give you my honest opinion. I really don't get the hubbub over the new iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus, which is going to have a big screen. For a really long time, every time I get a new phone, I examine everything that's available. In the past, every time I look at the iPhone, it has this small screen. I find the tactile characteristics of the screen to not be as nice as that of the Samsung Galaxy phones. And every single time, Lewis, I have so far opted for something other than an iPhone. And when I started looking at the specs for the new iPhone 6, the Galaxy Note 4, I guess, is kind of equivalent to the iPhone 6 Plus, the bigger one. I would choose the Note 4. I think the 6 has a slightly bigger screen, higher pixel density, better camera, better front camera, up to 64 gigabytes of extra storage. So if I were looking at the larger ones, I would go with the Galaxy Note 4. And in looking at the iPhone 6 versus the Samsung Galaxy S5, I would still go with the S5, Lewis. I just am not convinced after generation, iPod generation after iPod generation of what to me seems like an inferior product. I have to say my excitement level about the iPhone 6 is very, very low.
I agree. I do not, I have an iPod Touch. I use it for music. It's great. But I'm just a bigger fan of Android when it comes to phones and something I use, well, obviously for a lot of things other than just making phone calls. Yeah,
the iPhone 6 is slightly lighter, so that's something, but we're talking about a matter of grams. And even if this iPhone 6 is as good or almost as good or even slightly better than the Samsung, it seems like Apple is playing catch up with the latest round of Samsung Android phones, several months behind, sometimes even longer. So why would I want to go to the one that's as good after catching up and essentially copying what Samsung is doing? For now, I'm sticking with Samsung, Louis.
I also think they're playing catch up, and they need to revamp things. The next phone needs to be a game changer in order for them to actually catch up.
I put up a few months ago, I did my first painting and I put it up, and I have a second painting now. A lot of people have been asking, David, was that so discouraging, the first painting, that you have stopped painting altogether? Almost, but no, I did do one more painting. So let me grab these to remind people. Here is, let me see, how can I do this? Let's see if I can swing these around. Okay, here is the first painting. This is the first one, which I did, which I showed people a little while ago. Okay, this is the first painting. And the real problem is I'm not able to paint things with any kind of depth at all. Everything is kind of like at the same distance from the point of view of the painting. Okay, that's really the biggest issue I have with this one. And to be honest, I have no idea how to fix that. Here is my newest painting. I don't know what the name of this one is. The funniest name for the first one, I think, was Gay Dawn. I don't know what this one should be called. This is more of a nighttime scene, Louis. Try to improve on the first one. I think that it is somewhat better. There may be slightly more depth in this one, but I have to tell you, Louis, I don't know if painting is my thing.
Unfortunately, I look at David through a different camera, and all I see is a tiny little box with a glare. So I can't see your painting at all right now.
Let's see if I can hold it up. Louis, what if I hold it here? Is this any better for you? I'm covering my own face.
That's better. You know, I like the color palette. I like the use of some negative space there. I'm a much bigger fan of this painting. I think you've improved a lot.
Okay, well, listen, I have to be honest. I didn't see much of a difference. I thought it was slightly better. Send me your thoughts. What should this one be called? If the first one was Gay Dawn, is this one Transgender Dusk? I have no idea what this one should be called. People seem fixated on naming my paintings things related to sexual orientation. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know what I should do with these things also, because, you know, they're really starting to take up more and more space. 2192-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. And let's listen to a voicemail here.
Yeah, this is the Honest Economist. Regarding that so-called Christian pastor, Fairstein, who's offering a reward for proof God doesn't exist, here's some advice for someone to claim the reward, as if he would keep his word and pay it. I have proven to many people there is no God by setting a cup on a table and saying, God, if you're there, knock this cup over. When the cup remains, people who are smarter than this guy will say, God is too busy to bother with that. I then say, right, God is busy ending disease, violence, and world hunger. How's that working out? Also, for thousands of years, millions of people have prayed for an end to war and hunger, yet they exist. More proof of no God. Thanks.
Very, very interesting. And also another voicemail here related to not so much the proof of God, but related to tithing and the Pat Robertson story. Listen to this one.
Hey, David, this is in regards to the showed up Pat Robertson telling the 80-year-old to go get a job to tithe. The way I tithe is I throw the money in the air. God takes what he wants. Anything that lands on the ground, I get to put back in my pocket.
Hey, there's an idea, right? But that implies that the money is going right to God. Of course, a lot of these pastors need the money to do God's work in their church. So therefore, you can't just toss it up into the air. I'm guessing they would say something like that. On today's bonus show, Verizon's auto share, we will talk about the Apple Watch. Does Louis feel any more positively about the Apple Watch than he does about the new iPhone? And Google partners with a pharmaceutical giant. We will tell you about all of that and more. How do you access the bonus show? It's very easy. Become a David Pakman Show member. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. We're talking about pennies a day. You probably spend more on coffee, and you can support independent media by voting with your dollars. Go to davidpakman.com/membership, and we will talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.